Hi, I'm Chris Stock, CEO at SalesMD. We're a consulting and training company focused on helping medical practices convert leads into patients. Today, I'm speaking with Tom Seery, CEO and founder of RealSelf. Over 100 million people visit realself.com and their media channels each year. It is the healthcare marketplace where consumers can research aesthetic treatments, connect with physicians, and even book aesthetic services. Tom is on the board of directors of Research International, a non-profit organization, and also an advisory board member of the Buick Center for Entrepreneurship. Prior to RealSelf, Tom was a director at Expedia.com. So it's an honor to have this opportunity to interview you, Tom. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can get to know each other better after this moment when we're allowed to see each other in flesh and blood.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's probably where I'd like to just sort of jump in. I know you're incredibly busy, but through this pandemic, what's for you been one of the biggest takeaways living through this crisis?
I would go straight to how I think of there's no real playbook for most things when you're an entrepreneur. You sort of follow gut and instinct and data. I mean, you're always at the sort of the mercy of the market of your customers. So it's sort of built in that you can accept a high dose of ambiguity and unexpectedness. But I have to say, I really would have never fathomed the level of shock to the system that the pandemic represents to not just our business, but to our entire environment, our world, our humanity.
I totally agree. For me, I've found it sort of a real roller coaster, and I've used that analogy, a number of times in terms of, where I was, mentally throughout this process, and it's just I never imagined would ever be in this situation.
No, I don't think I would say anyone was, except maybe, the Gates Foundation here in Seattle has been certainly led by a very brilliant man who's been talking about pandemics for a long time, and the risk of that. And there are some governmental bodies that have warned us about this, but I think we're all sort of discovering what are our best responses to disasters and to highly disruptive events. And I just glad we had this event here in Seattle to wake us up for what is probably the predecessor to another environmental factor, which is earthquakes, which is we're in a high risk zone. And I would say, based on what I've learned over the last 3 months, we have a lot of planning to do, a lot of prep. But we're better now. We're more organized. And certainly as companies, we've all rapidly adapted and watched our customers amazingly. In the world of medicine, you don't think things don't move very fast. And it's just incredible how much things have shifted in such a short amount of time.
I totally agree. So for you personally, what's been that sort of aha moment? And I like to sort of think about it from a sort of maybe a leadership point of view, and you're clearly a leader in this industry. So what's been that sort of aha moment for you in terms of this journey through this time?
Yeah, I would say that I have found that as I've become more and more vulnerable in front of my team and embracing both the challenges and being very transparent about what we face, and not, doctoring it up and making it look better than it is, but actually just saying, here's what we know and what we don't know. I have found that has led to tremendous levels of trust building, new dialogues, and a bonding between my team members in a way that I don't think we would have achieved. I don't think I would have achieved as a leader if I hadn't had this crisis hit.
I love that, because as leaders, we often think about authenticity and how we develop that authenticity, that openness, that transparency. And And actually, I think we're all probably as leaders guilty of that we sometimes put out the veneer that we want people to see. And actually, this has forced us to, I love the word vulnerable, it's forced us to actually go there. How do you think you continue doing that? And not actually doing that sounds like it's false. How do you continue to be vulnerable, open, transparent, and all the things that you've discovered about you and what that's meant for you, your relationship with the team? How do you continue that as we come out of this and move forward?
Yeah, I have found that my team, it's almost like opening, once you open up the seal, you break the seal, it sort of gives you permission now to have these more authentic, as you say, authentic conversations. Internally, we have a operating principle around being direct, as an example. And we really strive to be an organization, and I strive to be as a leader, to be extremely to the point and in a very fair manner, an open-minded manner, but from a place of love, from a place of, I want you to achieve better, but here's something you are not achieving well, or whatever the feedback might be. And I would say that we have this guidance of operating principles and values that are really shaping our conversation. So it's not just, hey, we're all vulnerable and we're able to hold hands, and it's also, we have a framework for how we should operate with each other to preserve that goodness that comes with vulnerability.
Yeah, I think you're making some very good points around. You can be vulnerable, but it needs to be purposeful as well, in terms of how it connects. No, I love it.
It just can't be the CEO staying in front of his team crying. Or her team. It really that gives people that sense of, we still understand our direction. All these things you hear in business schools, or if you're starting a business, you need to have a mission and vision and values and goals. And all these things really come to roost when you have a team that's very open to now being authentic in themselves, but they still want direction. They still want to know which way is, direction north, or the guiding star to how and what we're trying to achieve. What are we long-term and longitudinally trying to achieve as a team?
Changing a little bit of the focus on sort of the practices. And it's one of the reasons I was keen to sort of have this interview with you. And it was actually one of my first interviews was Aaron Burton, and he even sort of cited you in his interview. So I need to speak with you. But whenever you post, it's always incredibly insightful. I always sit there thinking, damn, I wish I'd thought of that, or had that intelligence that you've got, the data that you're probably seeing from your systems. But based on sort of your latest sort of findings, what are the one or two areas that practices should be focusing on right now as they start to reopen?
Those are very kind statements, and Aaron is a fantastic leader. I look up to him more so than maybe he realizes. So if he's listening, I want him to know that.
I agree. I think he's just very open and supportive, and naturally for me, for my first one of these sort of business leaders interviews, I asked him, he went, yes, absolutely. So it started the ball rolling.
Yeah. And I think the similarity between him and myself, if I allow to bucket him together with me and going to what I post, is it's really actually an act of a little bit of selfishness, which is, I'm just curious about certain things and I like to share what I learned, versus I'm trying to manufacture things that I think people will like. And so if people find valuable what I'm sort of unlocking and finding, then great. I love it. And if it can help somebody make a better decision for their business or their practice, that's awesome too. But many times I say to at conferences and forums and venues, I'll say, well, I've never run a practice. I probably never will. You wouldn't probably want me to. And so I can't quite understand how these trends and patterns manifest in your business and your practice, but here's what we're hearing. Here's what we're seeing. What I'm seeing, to answer your question, though, is I'm not dodging. I think the 25% of people who, in our last survey, and we've been doing these pulse surveys of our community. We started with about 3,500 members, respondents, and then over every couple of weeks since the beginning of COVID-19. And we have found that the most recent poll said 25% of consumers who are very interested in sex but have put the decision on hold cite that they are concerned about safety. They're concerned about getting sick. And I think there's got to be at least a dozen other surveys out there showing, really trying to answer, why are consumers so disconnected from the healthcare system in America? There's just tremendous plummet in utilization rates of, say, ER and other specialties. I have many friends in other forms of medicine who are, literally watching the paint dry. They're so bored. And ER doctors have never been bored, right? And so they're like, there's nothing coming in. And there's some worrisomeness about that, by the way. That's an aside. But what is really important for every practice to reflect on is, how can you assert and actually act on delivering a safer experience? And I know that's kind of maybe a no duh, but I just haven't seen as many practices actively promoting their point of view and what they are doing to promote safety in the practice beyond what they normally would. I've seen some Dr. Greco in Savannah, Georgia, excellent business leader, surgeon. And if you go to his website, you'll see the first thing that pops up is, here's what we're doing to deliver a great, safe experience for you at our practice here in Savannah. So anyway, that's one. I'm sort of want to pause there and not keep going, but I just want to see if you agree with that, or do you have a different reaction than that being good advice or not?
No, it's funny you should say that. And if I could, I'd sort of go through my Instagram feed, but I saw one of the doctors out of Beverly Hills, maybe at OC, sort of come out and say, this is what we're doing. And it was literally sort of half an hour, 45 minutes ago. Sort of, you could scroll through, and every element of the safety was covered in an Instagram post. And I thought, wow, they've just nailed it in terms of, this is the experience. This is what you're going to feel and see and hear. And it nailed it. Versus what I'm seeing a lot of is, we're open. And I think that talks to exactly your point. That doesn't give me the confidence to suddenly want, great, you're open, but I need to feel this is going to be safe.
And we're open is a little bit of a self-serving message anyway. Well, good for you. That's great. But so tell me more.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly there's some pent up demand out there and people wanting to know that a practice is reopened. But, I look at schools and, a lot of the prospective patients that doctors in our area of aesthetics are sort of interested in are, younger parents and people who, in their 30s, 40s. And those parents are starting to get new information for how things are going to work in the next school year, how things are going to work if camps haven't been fully canceled like they have been in Seattle. And they're hearing from these organizations a whole punch list of amazing amount of changes. My kid's school it took them over an hour to explain all the changes they're going to be introducing next year. And it kind of made my head spin. But then, that's an environment with kids. Yes, there's a lot of potential for spread and so forth. And safety is a big factor for children, of course. But I'm entering a medical facility to get an elective treatment, totally elective. I don't need to be doing it. I would expect something quite similar, but maybe not as exhaustive. But if I wanted to go down the rabbit hole and really watch a video for 20 minutes about walking through your office and seeing all the things you're doing to change it, I think I might be interested in that as a prospective patient.
Yeah, I think it's, and you make a good point. For me, we're open is one, self-serving, as you said. It's also a little bit lazy. It's lazy insofar as, yes, there's pent-up demand and there's going to be a number of people, and actually you can't have so many people coming through the door. So it serves me, but as you say, it doesn't. I don't think it builds their brand. It doesn't build, beyond that sort of pent-up demand. And I'm interested in what happens in 3 months' time. Subject to no second wave and all of those things, but what they're doing now, I think, impacts 3, 4, 5 months in terms of what that demand for them could look like.
Yeah. I don't think I think you asked me for 2 insights, and I don't know if we have time for going too much farther down this path of what insights I have. But if you're curious, I can keep going down that.
No, I think we've transitioned into where I wanted to sort of go with my next question, in terms of, yesterday you sort of shared some interesting trends. One of them is about increase in consultation booking activity, and this is an impossible question that you can't answer, but subject to your magical crystal ball that you have just to the side, what do you think the next 3 to 6 months looks like for the practices?
Obviously, it's going to be very dependent on the type of practice, what services they deliver, the market they're in. So, like, for instance, here in Seattle, we've largely been buffered by the economic side of COVID-19. And I don't, believe me, there's a lot of unemployed people there. So I do not say that without empathy for individuals who are unemployed in Seattle, Washington. But there are some major employers who are seeing incredible upside, I guess, if that doesn't sound too crass, from the pandemic. That does sound wrong, but it's true. If you look at, Amazon's based here, we have Microsoft based here. And so I would say practices here are just going to see a different experience than a practice, say, in, Orlando, in a market where, really depend on travelers, like Vegas. So I guess I'm not trying to get out of you said it was going to be an impossible answer. So I just wanted to throw in, I'm completely self-aware that it depends, has to be part of it. I'm curious, and what I've been sort of challenging people to think about is what happens when 40 million Americans, or whatever the number ends up being, roll off their COBRA coverage, and suddenly household discretionary spending becomes something that they have to make big trade-offs on. And so what things can they delay? What things can they, what things are most essential? So I think there's this, the growth side of aesthetics, the people who are just coming into the market, who are new, who are intrigued, making the budget work somehow, taking loans, whatever it may be, care credit. I think that market's going to really be slow to show up in the next 12, 16, 18, 24 months. I think, and I don't know how to quantify what percentage that is, but Allergan calls them the consumers are sort of what they've said. There's tens of millions of women who are interested in Botox who are moving forward. So I'd call these sort of I think they call them the naive. I don't know if they call it, but I know in the industry it's called the naive consumer, as that consumer. I think they're going to be very hard to bring into the market to have that first experience on aesthetics, even with lower cost treatments, and certainly with surgical, where credit's going to be less available for a higher risk, lower availability. So I'm sort of meandering here only to say, I think once we get past this sort of one-time, pent up demand situation, I think there's going to be some challenges for these practices in regions that are highly affected, as well as, and lastly, and I think if you're in a wealthy area like Jason Posner, who's in Boca Raton, and he was telling me, well, a lot of people in his area normally travel and spend money. They're going nowhere, so they're able to spend money on aesthetics now. So that might help him in that area. But I don't necessarily expect that to be a national trend. Anyway, so that's what do you think? Do you have a sense for where things are going?
I think we're pretty aligned actually, insofar as, and that comes back almost back to the comment in terms of we're open is a little bit lazy, but it's there. And my mother is 80. I've got to be careful here though. If she watches this and I get it wrong, I'm in trouble. But I think she's 82. Let's say she's 80, because then I'm on the right side of the answer.
You don't know how old your mother is?
No, it's 82, 83. And she lives in Spain, and literally sort of 48 hours after the hairdresser was open, she was there having a haircut. And I, I'm saying, Mum, you must stay home. You shouldn't be doing this. And anyway, so I think there's very much that sort of the pent up demand. People are frustrated. They want to get out. They want to do something, and they want to do this. But I do think there is that, when the economy kicks in, I think we have been protected right now, and I think when those not protected, but there is that sort of the schemes for some of the businesses that are keeping some organizations afloat, and when that sort of comes to an end and we start paying back some of those loans, then the problems start. I don't think unless the economy bounces all the way back, which I can't see that happening. And even prior to this, we've been talking for the last 18 months of a recession coming, and this has sort of been that facilitation of this recession we've been talking about. So I think this kickstarts this cyclical recession, and
the sugar high from the trillions of dollars that are injected in the economy certainly have buffered many of these things. But I have friends who are very involved in organizations like Gates Foundation, and you want to have a sobering discussion, talk to epidemiologists and others who are saying, well, for those who think COVID sort of been defeated or is in our rearview mirror, they say it's fully capable and will come back in different forms. And I think we're more prepared. I think people are a little bit more can contain their fear in and frame it like, okay, I understand what this means in terms of risk. But, here in Seattle right now, as we sit here, there's I think at least 125 fishermen, sitting on a boat, right. Like I literally could walk to the boat from my house, who all have COVID-19. The whole ship is contaminated. And it's just a really scary indicator of like, here's what super spreading looks like. And I don't mean to rain down on parade. I'm a super optimistic person. I think we will all come through this and we will actually be better. I think I'm going to be a better leader. I think we're going to be a better industry than aesthetics. But I also think we got to take these things really seriously and get out of the headlines of politics and really be very, very astute to what is happening to the consumer, what is their behaviors, what are their attitudes, how are they shifting, because it's not like anything we've ever seen before in terms of the way it's reshaping Americans and probably globally consumers on how they think about life in general. And maybe aesthetics will be the beneficiary, right? It's like, wow, we really now care very much about our well-being and want to do everything we can to preserve what we have. And so it's possible there could be a tremendous wave of growth ahead of us. I don't know. And I just hope we're all sanguine we've got a lot of time to sort of work through some big challenges.
There's so many great things you've said and then sort of referenced and alluded to. I do hope as humanity that it has stopped us a little bit just to think again the impact that we're having on the planet and some of those bigger challenges that I had a project a couple of years ago, and I was living in San Diego, and every other week I was in London. And now I think, what was I thinking? Why was I doing that? And yes, it was a customer. I really enjoyed working with them, et cetera, but actually it's not sustainable. That's not a way, I've got to make a different decision. We all have to make different decisions going forward in terms of, that's not to say we don't travel. The world is there to be explored, but we don't need to commute to London from San Diego.
So there's a pretty distinct line between explored and exploited. And I think you're right. I have had a lot of moments to be able to reflect on, wow, I have stopped traveling and how much beneficial things have happened in my life, let alone how fewer resources I'm using. It was interesting. I was looking at photos from a year ago. I was trying to find something for my kids. And I just kept seeing weekend after weekend was pictures of me at conferences all over the world, Monaco and places. And I think I just let it get to my head. Like, wow, I'm being asked to speak at an event. It's so, it's so honorable, but I didn't realize what the consequences were for my children, my family, my friends, my business. So I don't know how my friends at Expedia and other travel world are going to see the market come back, but it will never come back. And I don't think probably in a decade, it just probably won't come back to where it's been today. Thanks to things like this, what we're doing, we're communicating just fine and probably actually a little bit more effectively using a format like this Zoom call and taking a moment to have a conversation.
I think I've connected probably more, and as you said, this is a great example. I've coming into this industry, you're clearly a prominent figure, and I've known about you since I've sort of been in the industry, but it's actually since I've stopped and sitting in my kitchen that we connect. It's not at the next trade show. It's actually through the technology, and that's great. I love it. I love.
We would see each other at a conference, and we would have that superficial, like, hey, let's sit down at this little round table and talk about things, and then exchange business cards, and you would go into a stack of 40 other business cards, and not without any intentionally trying to ignore you at all. It's just, we go back to our homes and we have to go do everything that we were doing before. And it's so super inefficient. I mean, look, I miss connectivity and seeing doctors. I really enjoy, and having some fun at times, but I don't know. I don't think I would ever give this back up. And I've bonded with I have little children, so I'm bonding with them in a way that I remember Dr. Corey Moss out of San Francisco, a great surgeon. I saw him at a conference a couple of years ago, and he said, "Corey, I have not seen you in ages." And he said, "Oh, that's an intentional thing." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You'll see me a lot less of me going forward." And I really honored that. I was like, that is how he got to that. Hopefully was on the, something good shoved him that direction, but it's amazing that, versus a pandemic. But I was really inspired by that, but I didn't act on it. And so now I'm acting on it, and Dr. Moss was right on. This is the right way to live life.
I love that story. It actually reminds me, I was coaching an executive of a FTSE 100. It's one of our top 100 companies in the UK. And I won't, as a coach, I don't mention any names, but he was courted to come and join this other organization. And as his coach, we were talking it through, and he said, "I'm not taking it." And, why? This is a phenomenal opportunity. Look who's asking you. He said, "I know he flies, he takes his private jet down to the south of France on a Friday night. When he arrives, on the flight, he goes through all of his numbers. When he arrives, he phones all of his CEOs and wants a report. And he said, Friday night, I'm taking my kids to Pizza Hut. And this company can have me from 6 o'clock in the morning on a Monday all the time, but 4:30 on a Friday, that's what my kids want to do. I'm doing it." And I came away thinking, wow, this is a career guy full of potential. But actually, when it came to that big decision, it's like, no, my kids get me. And I can almost, so I'm getting goosebumps just repeating the story, because that for me is what it's all about.
Yeah, mine's a Pizza Hut. I would change that out, but
Well, that's what the kids wanted to do.
I worked at Pizza Hut. One of my first jobs was at a Pizza Hut, and I know what's happening in there behind the scenes. That hopefully they've improved their standards since I worked
Yes,
at one.
hopefully they've matured.
I think I was talking to a member of my team who's, I would say, a very demonstratively proof point of a millennial and millennial generation, and very distraught with what's happening within America with the tensions around racial relationships and Black lives and let alone pandemic. And I said, I don't mean to be that cranky older generation person right now, but I think your generation needed to be shook up a little bit from staring at your phones, chasing after followers, likes, and loves that are all, kind of phony and not, and thinking that a hashtag is a form of advocacy, but they just didn't know how to put to action. So that's one thing. But I think to the point about working too much, I'm a Gen Xer, and there is some bizarre like status symbol with being busy. I don't know how that came about in our generation. Potentially the previous generation really impressed that upon us, that work ethic. But all of my friends, all of us work way too much, too many hours, crazy amount of our lives have been given up to something that doesn't give much back at times. And so to the person who decided they were going to forego the crazy career and spend more time with the people they love and who love them back, that's pretty noble. I look up to that. I think that's a fantastic story, and just one more example of that. People who have really priorities set, at least in my opinion, set in the right direction.
Wow, we've gone totally into areas I wasn't expecting, which is
sorry.
Is great. No, I love it.
You probably want to talk about, like, what do you think Botox pricing is going to do?
No, I don't. I love this. This is the type of conversation.
But this isn't what. Look, I just want to. Sorry to interrupt. Why I've enjoyed this conversation is when I do go to meetings and I'm asked to speak, I really want to have these conversations. I want to talk about life, and the people that I'm typically speaking to are very similar to myself. They run small businesses. They have an entrepreneurial spirit. They've taken a lot of risks to do that. They're way smarter than me. They've trained, and they're so focused and disciplined in how they got to where they are, where I'm a little bit more scattered and I like to call creative. So, where we can be most helpful for each other is talking about things like emotional maturity and values. And that's something that, Marie Olson is also, she's talked about that on the podium before, but we just don't get a chance to really talk about also, it's all about the team and the operations and taking care of your team first. And so people have asked me, well, where do you stand on, are you nervous about taking a stance on Black Lives Matter? I'm like, not at all. And they're like, well, what if somebody disagrees? And like, first, I believe we're talking about, from my perspective, I feel like it's a human rights issue, not a political issue, and a human rights stance and not a political stance that we want to take. And I have to look what matters to my team, to my Black team members, and to my customers. And they really, really find this to be extremely relevant, important that we have where we stand and take a stance. And I do too personally, but I feel that's kind of what is interesting, and why maybe running business and being business is better than just getting a job for, a job with the government or something. It comes with all that, but comes with a lot of responsibility to do the right thing.
Yes. So again, so many things I could sort of pick on and jump into, but I'm also conscious of the time. So coming back to sort of leadership, I think it'd be a really nice way to sort of finish. One of the things I know about my success over the years is the mentors and the coaches that I've had access to. And I'm sure in your journey you've had, and sometimes it may not even be a formal mentor or coach. Sometimes it's just that bit of steerage or that guidance that you're given. But if there was just one lesson you've learned or piece of advice you've been given that really stands out for you in terms of being a leader, what would that be?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to have many sources of inspiration and support and things that help me grow. I think that it goes back to my previous comment, which sounded maybe I was going in a random space, but I was trying to really get to a point, which is for a long time, I thought I was building a product. I was building a company. I was trying to get new customers. I was always, focusing on that's my job as a CEO. And then I got advice from one of my investors, early investors, angel investors. And they said, your job is really about enabling, empowering, and inspiring your team. And so start with your team and trust your team. And they're the ones who are going to figure it out, not you. They're going to be the ones who figure out how to get the next customer. And I think that that it sounds sort of subtle, but it was significant for me. It was almost letting go and saying, you're right. This is only going to work if I get to a place of trust. And the only way I can get to a place of trust is if I know that I'm being as authentic as possible and they are as well. And we're just being honest and transparent and very sharing and not worried about things like, well, what if they find out this and what if just accepting that information is going to be our friends and sharing that will be something that will make sure we all are looking at the same thing. So that's probably the most helpful. I can see that as a moment where I shifted my mindset and I actually started acting differently and behaving, I believe, more effectively as a leader.
I think that's a perfect place to finish. This has been phenomenal. As I say, got into different conversations, but I relish the conversation and where it went. So, same. Tom, thank you very much.
Yeah, Chris, thank you. You're a great host and very accommodating of my long responses. And but this is a fitting. This is the end of my week here, and this has just been a great way to end it. So thank you so much for inviting me on.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, you bet.